of the Japanese frenzy and the Mussolini flop. We are not asked that the rules of the game should be modified. Steady, we shall never descend to the German and Japanese level. But if anybody likes to play rough, we can play rough too.
Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, the indomitable British statesman, orator, and leader whose defiant spirit and unwavering resolve during the United Kingdom's darkest hour cemented his place as one of the most significant figures of the 20th century, lived a life of such prodigious activity, dramatic reversals, and monumental achievement that it reads like a grand epic of history itself, spanning the zenith of the British Empire.
Cabinet, in 3 weeks, England will have her neck wrung like a chicken. Some chicken.
2 catastrophic world wars and the dawn of the nuclear age, a life that began, fittingly, in a blaze of aristocratic privilege and controversy on November 30th, 1874, at Blenheim Palace, the monumental home of his grandfather, the 7th Duke of Marlborough, born to Lord Randolph Churchill, a charismatic and politically meteoric conservative politician, and Jenny Jerome, a beautiful and wealthy American socialite. A child of the Anglo-American alliance he would later do so much to foster, yet his early years were marked not by parental warmth but by neglect, leading to a deep and lifelong affection for his nanny, Mrs. Everest, and a difficult and rebellious school career at Harrow, where he was frequently punished for his poor academic performance, particularly in the classics, though he displayed an early and exceptional talent for writing and history. And after Harrow, following a path common for less academically inclined sons of the aristocracy, he secured a place at the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, graduating in 1894 and commissioning as a sub-lieutenant in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, a cavalry regiment, a career choice that provided him not with the prospect of glorious battle but with the 2 things he craved most, adventure and material for his writing. And he quickly leveraged his family's connections to secure postings. To the world's flashpoints, first to Cuba as a military observer during the Spanish uprising, where he developed a taste for Havana cigars and was first shot at, then to the northwest frontier of India, where he fought against Pashtun tribesmen and wrote his first book, The Story of the Malaccan Field Force, and then to the Sudan, where he participated in one of the British Army's last great cavalry charges at the Battle of Am-Daman in 1898. An experience he recounted in the River War, all the while filing dispatches as a war correspondent, a dual role of soldier journalist that blurred the lines between participant and observer and established a pattern of self-promotion and lucrative writing that would fund his life and ambitions for decades to come. His thirst for danger and glory reached its peak during the Second Boer War in 1899, where he travelled to South Africa as a correspondent. For the Morning Post, just weeks after his arrival, his armoured train was ambushed by Boer commandos, and he was captured and imprisoned in a POW camp in Pretoria, from which he engineered a daring and sensational escape, climbing a wall and travelling hundreds of miles to Portuguese East Africa, a feat that made him a national hero overnight and provided the springboard for his political career, winning a seat as a Conservative Member of Parliament for Oldham in the 1900 khaki election, but his independent and often contrarian nature soon manifested itself, and in 1904, deeply at odds with his party's stance on free trade, he dramatically crossed the floor of the House of Commons to join the Liberal Party, a move denounced as an act of supreme treachery by the Tories, but one that catapulted him into ministerial office when the Liberals won a landslide victory in 1906. First as Under-Secretary of State for the Colonies, then in 1908 as President of the Board of Trade, where, in a surprising ideological shift for the former cavalry officer, he emerged, alongside David Lloyd George, as a leading figure in the Liberal government's radical social reform agenda, helping to lay the foundations of the modern welfare state by introducing measures such as labour exchanges, unemployment insurance, and minimum wage laws. Driven by a paternalistic belief in social justice and a desire to stave off the threat of socialism, and it was during this period of political ascendancy that he married Clementine Hosier in 1908, a partnership that would provide the emotional stability and unwavering support crucial for weathering the tumultuous decades ahead. His ministerial career continued with great energy and occasional controversy. As Home Secretary in 1910, he faced criticism for his handling of the siege of Sydney Street, where he was famously photographed observing a gunfight between police and anarchists, and in 1911, Prime Minister Herbert Asquith appointed him First Lord of the Admiralty, a role for which he seemed perfectly suited, throwing himself into the modernisation of the Royal Navy with characteristic vigour, championing the transition from coal to oil power, and fostering the development of naval aviation and the new secret weapon, the tank. But it was his passionate, relentless advocacy for the British Grand Fleet in the years leading up to the First World War that defined this tenure, though his ambition and interventionist style also led him to micromanage military strategy. Post-war years were a period of political wandering and prolific writing. He served as Secretary of State for War and Air, where he advocated for intervention against the Bolsheviks in Russia to strangle Bolshevism in its cradle, and as Colonial Secretary, but he found himself increasingly out of step with the Liberal Party, and after losing his seat in 1922, he formally rejoined the Conservative Party, quipping that anyone can rat, but it takes a certain ingenuity to re-rat, and was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1924 by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, a role in which he proved surprisingly orthodox, most controversially by returning Britain to the gold standard in 1925 at its pre-war parity, a decision that overvalued the pound, crippled British exports, and exacerbated deflation. A policy widely blamed for worsening the economic distress that led to the general strike of 1926, and with the Conservative defeat in 1929, he entered a decade-long period out of office, his wilderness years, during which he was largely ignored by the political establishment and viewed as a reactionary warmonger for his fierce, lonely, and prescient warnings about the rising threat of Nazi Germany and the urgent need for British rearmament, speeches in the House of Commons that were met with embarrassment and attempts to silence him, while he devoted himself to writing, including his massive biography of his ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough, and numerous newspaper articles that funded his lavish lifestyle at Chartwell, his country home in Kent, a period of frustration and isolation that ended only with the outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939, when Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, recognising his unique talents, reluctantly brought him back as First Lord of the Admiralty, the same post he had held a quarter-century before. Her appointment signalled to the fleet with the simple message, "Winston is back." The failure of the Norwegian campaign in April 1940 finally brought down Chamberlain's government, and on May 10, 1940, the very day Hitler launched his blitzkrieg in the West, Churchill was asked by King George VI to form a national coalition government, becoming Prime Minister at the age of 65, later reflecting that he felt he was walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial, and he immediately infused his government and the British people with his own boundless determination to fight on, uttering his immortal words to the House of Commons on June 4th, after the miraculous evacuation of Dunkirk, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." And again on June 18th, "Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour," speeches broadcast by radio that galvanized a nation standing alone against the seemingly invincible Nazi war machine, his rhetoric forging a spirit of defiance that would sustain Britain through the Blitz, the Battle of Britain, and the long, grueling years of war. That followed, his leadership in a morale, strategic direction, and relentless activity, as he directed the war effort from the Cabinet War Rooms, cultivating his special relationship with US President Franklin D. Roosevelt to secure vital Lend-Lease aid even before America entered the war, and after the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, reluctantly aligning Britain with Stalin's USSR, declaring, "If Hitler invaded hell, I would make at least a favourable reference to that devil in the House of Commons," a pragmatic alliance of necessity that would shape the post-war world. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and Hitler's subsequent declaration of war on the United States brought the immense industrial might of America into the conflict, and Churchill, overjoyed, knew that ultimate victory was now assured, though the path would be long and bloody, and he devoted immense energy to coordinating the Allied grand strategy. Through a series of wartime conferences with Roosevelt and Stalin, at Casablanca, Tehran, and finally Yalta, where he fought to protect British imperial interests and maintain a focus on the Mediterranean soft underbelly of Europe, often against American preferences for a direct cross-channel invasion, a tension that culminated in the difficult but ultimately successful campaigns in North Africa, Italy, and Normandy, all while overseeing the vast complex of the British war economy and their strategic bombing campaign against Germany, his presence a constant, cigar-chomping, brandy-sipping, irascible, and inspiring force of nature. But even as victory in Europe was secured in May 1945, to his stunned disbelief, he was voted out of office in a landslide general election that swept Clement Attlee's Labour Party to power, a brutal rejection by the very people he had led to salvation. A moment of profound personal ingratitude that he felt deeply, though he accepted the verdict with democratic grace, telling his wife, "They have perfect right to kick us out. That is democracy. That is what we have been fighting for," and he entered the opposition, leading the Conservative Party from the backbenches, warning in his 1946 Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, of the new threat posed by Soviet expansionism in Eastern Europe and coining the term special relationship to describe the Anglo-American alliance he believed was essential to preserving peace and freedom, while also devoting himself to his monumental 6-volume history, the Second World War, which won him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. In October 1951, at the age of 77, he was returned to power as Prime Minister, a second tenure focused largely on foreign affairs, managing the gradual and often painful process of decolonization and grappling with the new realities of the Cold War, including the development of Britain's own atomic bomb. But his intellectual powers were now in decline, and after suffering a series of strokes, he finally resigned in April 1955, having led his country for nearly 9 of the most consequential years of the century, and he spent his final decade in gradual retirement, painting, writing, and being celebrated as a global icon and the greatest living Englishman, before dying at his London home at age 90 on January 24, 1965. An event that prompted one of the largest state funerals in world history, a solemn and majestic procession watched by millions on television across the globe, a final tribute to the man who had, through his courage, words, and will, embodied the defiance of freedom against tyranny and secured his immortal place in the annals of history, a flawed, brilliant, and utterly indispensable leader whose life was, in every sense, a grand and glorious adventure.